Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we've got another episode on one of our stretch goals that we're going to be able to accomplish while we're in dry dock. Right now, the Battleship is sitting on only 292 keel blocks, which may be the least she's ever sat on. Because, as you can see right here, we've blasted away some of the keel blocks. We did this by using the ultra-high pressure washers that were blasting the paint off the hull. We typically use about 30,000 psi for the ultra-high pressure wash. They cranked them all the way up to 45,000 and essentially turned these keel blocks into mulch to open up a gap. At this point, we can pull the entire keel block out and expose this. So we removed every other keel block for this entire row of 10 up here at the bow on both sides, port and starboard. We knew that this was always an area of concern for the ship. The plating down here is as little as a ½ inch thick. It's all welded construction, and it's mild steel. So Iowa-class battleships, remember, have a trimetallic hull with special treatment steel, high tensile steel, and mild steel. Mild steel is the softest and the weakest of that, and the most likely to corrode, especially where there's rivets or weld seams. And so because this is thinner, softer, weaker, it's a known area of concern. But we did the ultrasonic tests of the hull. We paid for 5,000 shots, and they actually gave us closer to 9,000 shots going through and checking to test the thickness of the hull plates. And up here, the plating had worn away by about half. So this plating under here is only about a ½ inch thick now. That's still pretty thick for most museum ships, but if we were an active vessel, once you've lost a quarter of the thickness of your plate, you would want to make repairs. Like in last week's video where we talked about how they clad welded over gaps in the hull. There's a link to that video down below if you missed it. So, we know that this is an area of concern. We know there's a weak spot here that's worn away to about 50%. So what do we do about it at this point? First off, all of our options are actually on the table. Because this part of the hull is all welded, we don't have to worry about the issues with riveting, welding near riveted seams that we've talked about in other episodes. So we could do everything from cropping out the bad steel and replacing it with new stuff. That's what we would really want to do if we were an active ship and had infinite money. All the way down to not addressing it at all and waiting until the next yard period 30 years from now. We had a completely intact system of coatings under the ship when we got her here, which means she hasn't corroded any more since her 1990 yard period, which means if we put a good system of coatings on here, we don't need to expect any more corrosion. Likewise, we inspected in the double bottom up forward here to make sure that she isn't corroding from the inside out, and she's not. So between the no additional corrosion and there's evidence here of previous invasive tests that the Navy has done where they've drilled holes in the bottom of the ship to test its thickness. So we know that the Navy was aware of this issue and they chose to do nothing. So that sort of gives us carte blanche to do nothing. So we've got those two options on the extreme: do nothing, crop out and renew. A great example of a museum ship that's cropped out and renewed is USS North Carolina, when they replaced a lot of the shell plating at their bow. They cut out the bad plating and welded in new stuff. So you got best case over there, you got do nothing, worst case down here. And then there's a couple options in the middle. Near the lower end of the spectrum, we could just like trowel on a liquid metal epoxy. That's relatively cheap. It will act as an abrasion resistant layer here, so that if something does end up rubbing on the hull where it's thin, it's tearing at the epoxy, it's not tearing at the paint or the ship's hull itself. Or we can weld what are known as stiffener plates or doubler plates on. Doubler plates have really fallen out of favor in recent years. However, we determined it's going to be the best option for us. Why it's the best option for us is we get to retain the original plating of the ship, and we're just welding a new plate over top of it. So the original stuff is still here. We don't have to cut out original material of the ship and replace it with unoriginal stuff. That's perfectly acceptable if you're doing like material and like fashion, but as a curator, I really like to keep the original stuff. Why it's bad is when we weld the new plate on, we're going to damage this underlying paint coating in some places. And so that's going to weaken it, and if there is any water intrusion problems, those areas are what are going to waste away the quickest. It's additionally a problem because there is a gap between those two plates. So it's completely plausible that one of these weak weld seams could fail, water could get in between the plates, and it's just held there and it just continues to corrode. However, given that we do have yard periods scheduled out periodically, we did not know how bad of an issue this was, so it wasn't something that we had saved up for. Now we do know, so we can plan on addressing it in the future yard period. In 30 years, this isn't going to waste through. So as long as we are doing our yard periods in a timely manner like we're supposed to, the doubler plates are going to act just fine to protect the original steel of the ship from corroding any further until we come into the yard next and we can have a plan with funding and everything else for how we're going to deal with this problem. So this section where we have an issue is about 80 feet long and 4 feet wide on both sides of the ship, port and starboard. So we're going to weld 1/4-inch plate over the 1/4-inch that's already there. Started out as 1/2 inch, or by the far end of the ship, it's already at 0.875 inches. So we're choosing 1/4-inch because that's going to give us back the original as-built weight, and 1/4-inch is thin enough that you see the hull has some curve here, so we're going to have to bend that plate around. Anything thicker than that is going to be too expensive or prohibitive to do. We're limited in the amount of time that we're in the yard. Fortunately, because of the money we've made from tours, we are able to do this project basically what I would call the second best way. Cropping out and renewing is the best way. Doubler plates is second best. So we are able to fully address the problem thanks to the funding. So the next question is, why is it this area in particular? My guess, besides the trimetallic hull being mild steel here, is the ship has 3 blocking positions, right? The Navy doesn't pay to fleet the ship every time she's in the yard because they plan on dry docking her every 2 to 5 years. So the first time she's dry docked, they put her in blocking position 1. The next time they dry dock her, they'll put her in blocking position 2. And the time after that, blocking position 3. My best guess here is that the Navy, first off, notice how close together these blocks are. Fleeting the ship does not really expose this full area very well. So my best guess here is that the ship is decommissioned relatively quickly every time she's in service. So in the 40s, she goes into dry dock in 1945. They probably use blocking position 1. And then she goes into dry dock in 48 to be decommissioned. So they never get to blocking position 3. They reactivate her in the 50s. She might make it through all 3 positions then. They reactivate her in the 60s. She's really only dry docked to reactivate and then deactivate. So they probably don't make it to blocking position 3. In the 80s, they reactivate her. They put her in blocking position 1 in 87, and then they deactivate her. So they might not make it to all the blocking positions. So my guess is, because the ship isn't cycling through all the blocking positions, there are parts of the hull that essentially have not gotten work in any sort of consistent manner. So that's a guess why this is corroded worse than anywhere else. So our solution is to take 10 8x4 by 1/4-inch plates and just butt weld them in a row right here. We'll remove half the blocks, we'll put the plates in. When we fleet the ship, we'll put the other half of the plates in. We'll just repeat this on both sides of the ship. And then we've got that extra layer of steel here as protection for the next 30 years. And either a much, much older Ryan or one of my successors will plan for a scope of work that fully repairs this project sometime in the late 2050s or 2060s when we're next in the yard. We really appreciate your support of the dry dock tours that allows us to keep adding to the scope of work of this yard period, even though this wasn't something we were originally going to do. The money that you guys have given us through the dry dock tours and the donations you've made means that we can tackle this additional six-figure project. If you want to see this work happening and support the museum, there's a link in the description below for places you can buy dry dock tour tickets. If you've looked in the past and we were sold out, we now have added some Friday night tours and added an additional 2 weekends in June that are going to allow you to come out and see the ship. So if you haven't gotten tickets yet, you still have a chance to. There's a link in the description below to donate to the museum and a link in the description below to get your dry dock tour tickets. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support, and there's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, subscribing so more people find out about us on the channel. Thanks for watching.